Thank you for joining us today for the virtual office hours and our short presentation on the term found in collections. This monthly series is a program of the Vermont Historical Records Program, part of the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration. VHRP is generously funded by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and the Vermont Secretary of State's Office. And my name is Jane Cadwallader, and I am the roving archivist. I provide technical assistance and guidance to historical societies, public libraries with special collections, and municipalities in support of the VHRP mission to improve public access and engagement with historical records, and to encourage and facilitate collaborative efforts among Vermont's historical records repositories. I would also like to make two introductions today. First, of course, Director of the VHRP, Rachel Onif, who joins us today and thankfully is monitoring the chat and waiting room. Thank you. And Darlene Young, Registrar at the Old Stone House Museum. She will be talking about her own experience with found in collections later in the presentation. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to the chat, or you can wait and ask them during the question and answer period. And this presentation does include discussion of Vermont statute. I just wanted to impress upon you, I'm not a lawyer, and this presentation is for informational purposes only. If you do have legal questions about the topic, you should contact a lawyer. All right, let's begin. I added a few photographs to this slide showing situations you may be familiar with. A random box in the corner that's been there since before your time, or a mysterious Post-it note on a box found in the back of your storage area, without proper documentation or even a hint of how it got there. Sometimes you can even find materials like old photographs just hanging out in your office drawer. What do you do with these materials? There is no clear identification of what the items are, where they came from, or even if your organization has ownership. Without clear ownership, you can't do much, whether that is to add to your collection or disposition the item. They take up two precious resources, time and space, and this can be frustrating. So the first thing we need to do is name this assemblage of undocumented materials. They're referred to as found in collections. Found in collections, which I'll refer to as FIC from now on, is a term commonly used in the cultural heritage professions to identify materials in the physical possession of a museum, historical society, or other collecting organization that, after thorough research, are unsupported by documentation or evidence of their ownership. So the photos I mentioned before are ones that may be more visible, sitting there taking space in your new office, for example. But as caretakers of your organization's collections, you'll want to or have already taken a more uniform approach to undocumented materials. Instead of starting this project as IDing FIC materials, you should visualize this as part of a more comprehensive collections inventory. Identifying FIC as being an outcome. The inventory process compares accessioning records, which are the records of acquisition and prove ownership, to the collection materials that are physically present in a consistent method. An inventory is a time-consuming process, but is necessary to confirm that the materials in your collection are accounted for and to identify items that are not on the accession record or perhaps do not have all the required information. For example, a group of letters are listed in the accession record, but the donor field is not completed. Now we have determined the undocumented materials in the collection, but what do you do with this information? If you don't know who owns it or where it came from, how can you determine clear ownership by your organization? Well, the first thing is to start documenting it. If there is no accession record, create one now. Documenting that it was found in collections, consider adding a U to the start so that you can easily search all found in collections materials. This information will help you and future caretakers know how this material came into your possession, and it can be updated later when you determine ownership or you end up finding a document that shows it has clear ownership. In many states, abandoned property laws help us determine ownership for FIC materials. The Society of American Archivists definition of abandoned property law is defined as a statute describing specific procedures that allow an individual or organization to obtain clear legal title to material that it holds but does not own. Many states have these laws, including Vermont. In Title 27, Property, Chapter 12, Museum Property, Sections 1151 to 1158 of Vermont statutes, these are laws specific to materials that are physically held at museums. A link to the full chapter is available on the resource slide of this presentation and has more detail than I can convey in this short presentation, and I encourage that you read it on your own. In Section 1151 definitions, a museum is defined as an institution operated by a nonprofit corporation or a public agency primarily for educational, scientific, historic, preservation, or aesthetic purposes, and the institution owns, cares for, exhibits, studies, collects, archives, or catalogs property. Museum also includes historical societies, parks, monuments, and libraries. Section 1152, property held without a loan agreement, states that any property held by a museum that is not subject to a loan agreement and has been held for 10 or more years and has remained unclaimed shall be deemed to be abandoned. The property shall become the property of the museum, provided the museum has given notice pursuant to Section 1154 of this title, and no assertion of title has been filed for the property within 180 days from the date of the third published notice. So after additional research, and there is always more research to do, I find, to determine the museum has held physical custody for 10 or more years, and that they have made a concerted effort to find any documentation in their administrative files, newsletters, meeting minutes, etc., they can make a notice of abandonment. Section 1154, Notice Requirements by Museums for Loan Property, provides instructions on when and how to publish this notice. If a museum has no record of an owner, the museum publishes one notice each month for 3 months in the principal newspaper of general circulation in the county where the museum is located. The section provides what needs to be included in the notice. This is including a description of all items. If you have hundreds of items in your repository that are found in collections, this could present quite a problem. But this description can be placed on the organization's website and then linked to the notice. This saves time, copy space, and money. And back to Section 1152, it states that the abandoned property will become the property of the museum, again, 100 days after the third published notice, if there are no claims made. This gives us a definitive timeline. 10 years or more in physical custody of the museum, 3 published notices over 3 consecutive months, and 180 days without claims after the third notice. And then finally, I'd also like to bring your attention to Section 1158, Record of Acquisition. This states the museum shall maintain or continue to maintain the extent such information is available, a record of acquisition, whether by purchase, bequest, gift, loan, or otherwise, of property for display or collection, and of deaccessioning or loan of property currently held or thereafter acquired for display or collection. This statute identifies that it is a museum's responsibility to maintain documentation on all collection materials in their custody. So another reason to start documenting found in collections items as soon as possible. As you can see from the previous slide, determining ownership of FIC materials is a big task. So here are a few things to consider as you plan your strategy. Researching your materials is incredibly important in this process. Not the historical significance or the purpose of the item, but its provenance. According to the SAA dictionary, this is the information regarding the origins, custody, and ownership of an item or collection. Ideally, this would be a detailed file with all the fields filled out. That's not what we are working with. So we have to dig a little deeper and be creative on where we look. This means a side project and a little detective work. Looking through all administrative files for your organization. Another option is reaching out to former board and collections committee members to ask if they hold any collection records or know where they could be located, or even remember an object coming into the museum, object or archival materials. And even looking through old newsletters can help you learn when items came to the museum. Work with your board and collections committee or individual to develop collection management policies and procedures that inform stakeholders about your organization's practices. This information should be easily accessible to the board, committees, members, and the public. Please note that certain institutional knowledge should be for the organization only, but collections policies, deed of gifts, and information on how to donate materials should be readily available. Depending on the size of your organization, you may have a collections committee, collection staff, an individual volunteer, maybe a combination, or no one. Whatever your current situation, designating at least an individual, better yet, a team, can help minimize the occurrence of FIC. If there are clear procedures for accepting donations and they are widely known, you can be more certain that items will be directed towards the persons responsible. Items will still come in and end up on someone's desk, but making the process known will help those individuals know what to do next, or to ask the right questions of the donor, or return the item and ask them to go through the proper channels. And lastly, this isn't always possible, but having a known designated location for all donations when they first arrive can help to maintain intellectual control of what's in your repository. This spring, I learned about the FIC project currently happening at Old Stone House Museum, part of the Orleans County Historical Society. Darlene Young, the Old Stone House Museum registrar, has been working on this project to identify, claim, and make determinations for the FIC materials in their physical custody. When researching this presentation, I reached out to Darlene for her insights, and she kindly shared the following: that this is a multi-stage process, and I really took that to heart. As you can see from the general outline she shared, in my presentation, I focused on what are FIC and the statute that applies. But as you can see, there is more to it than simply identifying and notifying. At this time, I would like to ask Darlene to discuss the Old Stone House Museum's project and her experience. Thank you, Darlene.
Yeah, we started this process about a year and a half ago, and we started with an inventory, and we realized quickly that there were many things in our collection that we didn't have clear ownership for, didn't have donor information. And we were looking at all kinds of things. We were looking at archival material. We were looking at furniture and framed objects, and the whole gamut. And but in terms of this, in terms of the archives, I just started making a list of everything that we found in the inventory that in the archival material that we didn't have clear ownership of. And then from there, we went to the research phase. And as Jane said, we looked at old newsletters, and we talked to old former staff members and board members and directors, and we combed the records for any little scrap of information that we thought we might find. And we were able to pull some things off that list. It kind of at one point felt like looking for a needle in a haystack, but it is definitely worth the effort to look through your materials and to talk to people. because you can nail stuff down, you can nail ownership down, and so once we had a final list of the undocumented materials, we ran the advertisement in the local newspaper. And what it did was it sort of opened up a conversation, both in-house and with the public. So I needed all of my colleagues to be up to speed. I needed the board to be up to speed. I didn't want anybody to be surprised if they bumped into somebody in the community and said, "What's this thing about abandoned property that I saw in the newspaper?" And so people got to ask all kinds of questions. Some of them that dealt directly with the Found and Collections Project, but many were just much more general about what it is that we do in the collections field, because they didn't understand. The notice that we published has some legalese in it, and people didn't really fully understand what it said. But again, it opened up a conversation. We got to use that opportunity to talk about what we do. And then, once once the ads have run 3 consecutive months, and then the waiting period is over, then it's time to make recommendations for what to keep and what not to keep. And that for us, that went through the collections committee and then the board, and then we did the documentation. Then we did the documentation of accessioning every object or every item or every collection, and in some cases photographing them, numbering. So yeah, I talk about this project as kind of eating the elephant one bite at a time. It's For us, it's a big undertaking. We did 300 objects, both archival and objects, in the first round. We're in the waiting period of our second round of found collections, and we have 500 objects and archival material in the second round. And I'm constantly adding to my list for round 3. Although I think I need to take a little break, I think, between round 2 and round 3 to catch up. But so it's a lot, but it's doable. You take it one bite at a time.
Cool. Thank you, Darlene, for sharing your experience. I appreciate it. And I realize that this type of project looks different for each organization. They're all different sizes and different structures, but the work that you have accomplished can certainly serve as a guide to others. So thank you. All right. So before we end, I did want to point out some of the resources that I used for this presentation. The PowerPoint will be sent to all participants after the presentation with these links. So don't worry about having to write them down or anything. And then I can always provide those to you at a later date too, if you're interested. I've also included a link to Old Stone House Museum's Found and Collections project, so you can learn more about it. And that, I believe, is the third resource down. Great. I just want to thank everybody for attending the virtual office hours. I hope that this presentation helps answer some of the questions surrounding found and collections and how to approach these materials. We'll end here, stop recording, and we'll start taking questions and comments. Thank you.